All right. Hello, Dragon Slayers. I'm your host on Dragon Slaying, Dr. Tom Bittker, joined by my partner, attorney, thoughtful person, scholar, rabbi, by appointment for me, Michael Dallen. It is February 8th. We're celebrating our most important religious holiday, Super Bowl Sunday today. All of you out there, I would urge you to, if you drink, one is enough, and a small one. We're actually doing this podcast at a time which I think is one of the most dangerous times in recent history in our country. And I say that because I believe the country has been fractured by the behavior of, I would argue, both sides. By the way, if you want to support this, pick up a copy of Dragon Slaying and read The Rainbow Covenant, a wonderful book about the Torah, the Bible. Well, how do we come to this? And I thought, in contrast with what we're dealing with right now, I would ask you, Michael, who do you believe to be the greatest of American presidents?
I'd have a hard time choosing between Washington and Lincoln.
I think they're both great. I'm going to go back to Lincoln because he had a model of governing that was remarkable and needed in times like this. That was best chronicled by one of the best, if you wanted to say, a handbook for the president, written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals. And what she pointed out is that Lincoln, this humble attorney from Illinois, did not go to Harvard, didn't even go to the University of Chicago, studied carefully the law, but he was a deep, thoughtful man, and he was a virtual unknown until the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And I would remind people that that was rather remarkable because we didn't have media at that time beyond simply a newspaper. But he was elected. But when he came to office, because of his humility, he assembled a cabinet of some of the brightest, most powerful people in the country at that time who very likely initially despised him. But rather than seeking loyalty or ideological purity, Lincoln sought talent, perspective, legitimacy, believing the nation's crisis demanded the best minds available. Now, I don't want to go into great depth, but that's a different philosophy in assembling a cabinet than we have seen in recent times. What we have seen in recent times is, and I would say particularly with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, are cabinets that mirror the philosophy of the president, which can be quite dangerous if the president is himself not a very well-read man and not very humbled. I would say that, in my mind, the greatest presidents had for their advantage that they were students of history. Lincoln was, certainly. Teddy Roosevelt was. And I would argue that certainly Jack Kennedy was. And I would say one of the things that was great about Kennedy is he modeled Lincoln in the assembly of his cabinet. The other thing that was true about great presidents is that they had the capacity to collaborate. Even Ronald Reagan, who actually got to the presidency late in his life, was a student of history. And he was a bright guy. If you think about what it takes to be a movie actor, memorizing lines and so on. And for years, although I know, Michael, you may disagree with him, he was kind of like he was more in the mold of a William Buckley than he was a firebrand crazy man. He studied history and was an anchor of a conservative perspective and actually was able to govern the state of California at a time when there was significant conflict within the state. Well, we don't have that now on Donald Trump, certainly. Trump's litmus test is loyalty, and his narcissism is so great that, I mean, if you look at what the man has represented, he's got, if you will, a Barbie doll wife, and I don't know, which wife is that for him, Michael? Is it 3 or 4?
Three.
Wife number 3. Okay. He assembles and dissembles his cabinet based largely on whether they agree with him. So there's not only narcissism in the sense that, hey, I'm the best, it's my way or the highway. There's also perceptual narcissism. That is, you have to see the world as I see it. And if you don't see it as I see it, you're out of here. And that's how we got to our current state of affairs, I believe. Now, on the other side, there are arguments, and I would say with a modest degree of legitimacy, most recently advanced by Peter Schweitzer in the book, forgive me,
It'll come to you.
I'm sure it will. Give me just one moment. Let me think about this. Sorry, guys. Editors, you can cut this part out.
I love Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, A Team of Rivals.
It is indeed a handbook, isn't it?
Well, anything about Lincoln, it's just so impressive. What a wonderful man. But all of his people were anti-slavery. I mean, they did reflect his ideas.
Well, yeah, you're passionate about that.
They were, all of them. And
Okay.
that was a big issue at the time.
Okay, editors, you can pick up again. Peter Schweitzer recently wrote a book which has provoked some controversy, but I think we need to listen to it. It's entitled The Invisible Coup. And what Schweitzer is arguing is that back in the days of Jimmy Carter, there were people attempting to flee Cuba. And he took in many of those people, at which point Fidel Castro virtually emptied the jails and mental institutions and poured those people in the United States. And Carter, later in his administration, had to essentially bribe Castro to take these people back. Well, there have been successive waves of immigration prior to this time, but in prior times, the expectation of the immigrant was that you are here, you're going to renounce other governments and other rulers, you're going to learn about our culture, and you're going to swear fealty to the principles of America. Read our Constitution, understand us, become part of us. So prior to that time, the criteria for immigration was we need immigrants, and these people will join us in the melting pot. Admittedly, there was a significant conflict within the country, but the expectation always was of loyalty. Well, that's no longer the case. And we see frightening demonstrations of people who not only disagree with us, but actually are trying to destroy us from within. Schweitzer has a pretty elegant argument, and despite the fact that the argument comes from the right, it ought to be considered. Okay, so Donald Trump is confronting this, but how does he handle it? He doesn't handle it like a cerebral, thoughtful person. He handles it the way he handled the beginning of his life. Do you know what Donald Trump's first job was, Mike?
Thought it was collecting rent for his dad.
Absolutely. And from whom was he collecting rent?
Welfare people.
Right. So his dad was a slum landlord, and
He was a welfare billionaire.
the Donald, buff Donald, probably far fitter than he is by now, by any means, would be the strong man, the intimidating arm that collected rent. He was a bully.
He collected rent. You don't have to be a bully to collect rent. If they want to stay, they'll pay their rent.
Well, my understanding of the back channel stories is that he was a pretty tough guy.
My experience with people like Trump is that they're physically cowardly. I can't imagine him being, like, brave. Maybe he was.
Well, how about just posturing with two strong guys who did have courage on his side?
He would do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so long as he was invulnerable. Yeah, people like that in my acquaintance with bullies and wannabe bullies, they are cowardly.
I
They're
agree.
very fearful of suffering personal injury, don't wanna be hit in the face.
So we only have to witness the career of many schoolyard bullies that were taken down by somebody swifter and more cunning than they were.
what frightens me is he's found another Roy Cohn. Like, the first Roy Cohn was a self-consciously evil person who repudiated the values of his really nice parents. His dad was an FDR Democrat and appointee from the Democratic Party to a judgeship. Very well-regarded, humanitarian, liberal-minded man, and his lady wife, who was a fitting consort, and they produced Roy Cohn, who was a Jew without the Torah, a lawless Jew, brilliant. He went to school, he went through law school without studying much. He was a stringer for Walter Winchell. He was a gay guy in a time when being a gay guy was very problematic, and no doubt that caused some trauma. But he decided to walk on the evil side. His father was a model of honesty, of probity, and Roy was a model of everything opposite: cruel, disdainful, a blackmailer. And now Trump has found Stephen Miller, who is another Jew without Torah. He's been looking. I've seen the stuff that's in the general press. Reading about Trump depresses me, but I know that he's been asking for a new Roy Cohn. Where is my Roy Cohn? Because Cohen died of AIDS and horribly. I told you the story. First book review I ever wrote was I was writing it in Tel Aviv about.
Just in terms of context, Cohen was Joe McCarthy's attorney, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, he's famous in the Army McCarthy hearings because he's the lawyer, the legal mind, the brilliant Jew, alongside this drunken American Irishman, McCarthy, who's sitting there, and they're having these hearings against, I think it was Thomas Welch, at any rate, the attorney for the Army. The McCarthy people had pulled strings with the Army, and they caught them, and trying to get some preference for one of Roy Cohen's boyfriends, and they were having these hearings, and McCarthy struck back, and Cohen knew it's a famous film. It's caught on tape. People didn't know what a louse McCarthy was, what a bullying bum he was, and then they saw it on TV, and there he was, and he's going after one of Welch's Justice Department people, and Roy is smart, and he's going, "No, no, no," sitting alongside his stupid, drunken client, "Do this, don't go there." And McCarthy, heedlessly, like a club-footed cow, goes and asks, "Tell me about the communist history, the National Lawyers Guild history of one of your men." And Welch rises up in the grandest moment of television ever and of his life. And he starred, by the way, in Anatomy of a Murder as a judge, and a very convincing judge he was. And that's where you get the famous line, "At long last, Mr. McCarthy, have you no decency? Have you no sense of decency?" And just skewers McCarthy, and Roy is going, "Oh, no, no, no," because he knew better. He saw it coming and tried to keep it from happening, but McCarthy was, just this.
For film buffs, Anatomy of Murder was Jimmy Stewart and Lee Remick. Is that right?
That's right, and George C. Scott,
Yep.
and
A hell,
Welch, and Welch.
a hell of a cast.
They talk about it today in Marquette, Michigan. They filmed it in the courthouse there, and it was supposed the story took place in the Marquette courthouse. It was written by, um, I've forgotten his name, great my greatest law school teacher, one of the 2 greatest, knew the guy. He was a famous Michigan Supreme Court justice and a fly fisherman. I learned a lot of trial technique and lawyers do, from Anatomy of a Murder. But Roy Cohn was an extraordinarily rotten, lying, thieving, manipulative guy, and there's a movie about Trump and Roy Cohn. It's called The Apprentice. Trump was Roy Cohen's apprentice, and Cohen died. He was like crazy promiscuous at the height of the AIDS epidemic and died of AIDS, and Trump has been bereft since. But you know the story that Roy Cohn introduced Trump to his friend Richard Nixon, already disgraced, and they introduced Trump to Nixon, and Nixon was thinking and saying, "You've got it, kid. I don't know what it is," to Trump. "I don't know what it is, but you've got it. We can run you." And, he had some kind of mysterious charisma. It's way
Uh,
those of us who despise him.
I think he had the capacity, and I think I've mentioned this model before, Walter Isaacson's comments about Steve Jobs without regard to how he treated his wife and children. He was a brilliant guy, and he had the capacity to create what Isaacson termed the reality distortion field. And Trump has that same capacity with his true believers.
Well, I guess, but now he has this aide, Stephen Miller, who is the brains, one of the brains in the administration, and he's been studying up since they're 4 years out of office after the first administration, how to do what they want, how to press the edges of the American republic and turn it into a vehicle for oligarchy, for oligopoly, and they're doing that. You wanted me to look up what the basis for this, what the Bible has to say about this, and what the Bible has to say is warnings from the prophets, generation after generation of prophet, of watching out for the rich and the powerful. The rich and the powerful without humility, without fear of God, they're a terrible force, and they'll steal the dust from a cadaver, you know, some of the imagery of the prophets for their own self-aggrandizement and to protect themselves and to advance themselves. You know, you get lawless people who despise the law, who want to dominate society. It's not good for the long term. They seek short-term gains because they don't have much vision. And I think that's what we've got here. I mean, we have a war. We have an increasingly plutocratic society that is no longer capable, at least at the moment, of sustaining Republican virtues, and we're losing our democracy.
Well, one of the paradoxes of Trump's governing style, which I would call politics by bullying, not collaborative politics, is that the irony is, although you may compel short-term loyalty among your closest lieutenants, you see fragmentation when any particular lieutenant no longer is willing to go along with the party line. So you see a rather high turnover rate among cabinet members. But the other problem you have with the politics of bullying is that paradoxically it is fragile and it loses the loyalty of a natural constituency. That is, he alienates people every time he does this rather than, for example, let's just take the whole issue of the immigrants. You and I have different sides on it, but a more cautious person would simply say, we need to target the people that are our real concern right now, not the people that are in this country trying to find work, not the people in the country that are working and actually make the country stronger and add to the melting pot. We need to target disruptive, toxic, lethal forces. So you make an agreement, and we're going after only people who are convicted of felonies, and you seek the cooperation of each government. You don't say, we're going to come in no matter what. Say, do you want to cooperate with us? And Tim Walz will say no. And then Trump can say, well, we're going to selectively withdraw some of your law enforcement funds for that. And then Tim Walz will take it to court. And it would be held in a far more civilized way than right now. But that's not what's going to happen. What's happening is we have fracturing all over the place. And what Trump is going to yield is a very bitter harvest of a groundswell of Democratic support in the midterms. And then what's next? What's next is some lieutenants will leave, some lieutenants will turn to the other side, and smart people, I hope, like John Thune and others will come forward and say what the congressional Republicans said to Nixon, "Sir, you no longer have our support. We would strongly suggest that you resign for health reasons." And that's
Well,
likely to happen, I would say, by 2027.
well, J.D. Vance is no day at the beach himself. I mean, he is a sycophant and a liar and a crook. So I don't know how great it is to you, the Yiddish word is stunk to describe these gentlemen, and you got a couple of stunks. One of the things I was just saying, it was Trump's assistant attorney general who went on the air, and this is like the second chief law officer after the president himself and after the attorney general, Bondi, who's awful and ignorant. But he was saying that all immigrants are felons, all illegal immigrants, people who have aren't here perfectly properly, are felons. The Supreme Court has ruled they're not. There's a civil infraction in overstaying your visa and
No, I
uh,
know. I get
they're
it.
not felons, but they're treating them like felons. They're pepper spraying them in the face once they're down. I mean, that's you don't do that to a felon either, but, the way they're pursuing them, it's as if they're Bonnie and Clyde, and you're talking about people who have been supporting our society. They've saved us infinite amounts of money. They've been very productive.
Well, this is absurd. I mean, if you arrested everybody, we would have no food.
They're not felons. They're
Yeah, you're
not
right.
horrible criminals,
But
the
but
program
you're
the
looking at
program
the silent underclass of people that are harvesting our food. I mean, I have a buddy of mine became a friend. He's a guy that does my landscaping, and he would not be functioning were it not for the undocumented people working for him. And you look at the silent labor that goes on in this country of admittedly people that have been here for a while. And the other interesting thing about that is their kids can be some really wonderful people. I have among my practice some children of these undocumented immigrants that are here, and they're quite accomplished. We've given them a chance, and they're doing beautifully. So, yes, I think the indiscriminate enforcement of this can only produce alienation. It's foolish. It is, and first of all, can it be accomplished? No, it can't be accomplished. Not going to happen.
It's terribly self-destructive, but they get off on it. They like it. These are people who well, there's this doctrine that we supposedly live in a post-religious age, and there are all these former Jesuits, Jesuit-trained people. Our Supreme Court is dominated by Jesuit-trained people. I don't know how religious these people are today, but they all learned the doctrine that humanity without the love of Christ, without the love of God, uh, however they put
Scalia was one of those, right?
very much, but
Yeah.
they all 5 of them, are Jesuit trained, and they've all learned the doctrine that humanity without, that is utterly depraved. So they believe that these people that they don't like are godless, children of a lesser god, as it were, and are utterly depraved, and that the good people, the prosperous people, their constituents, their friends, need to do anything they can to protect themselves from these utterly depraved hordes who will eat their eyeballs, is the idea. And you're talking about ordinary human beings who are you have good, you have bad, but you don't have hordes of zombie cannibals, but they treat them like that, and they worry. As a kid, I think we all growing up in the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust, we tried to understand what motivated these people to what motivated the damn Germans and the damn Italian fascists to vote the way they did, because they voted in tyrants. They voted in cruel, awful, evil tyrants, and they knew, they knew a lot about who they were voting for, and through it all, there was this terrible fear that they would lose what they had, that the onslaught of the unwashed, of the other, would take away from them and from their children and loved ones. And it's just a terrible fear, and it becomes hate, and I think that's what they're working with. And at the same time, you have this general tendency of every society. Plato felt that in the Republic, he wrote that a democracy can only last for a century, maybe two at most. We're coming up to our 250th year, which Trump wants his pals to support, to gild it up like he loves gilding, to get special favors and to benefit him. It's been a long run for our democracy, and we've done pretty well, but we're losing it now because, as Plato says, the rich and the powerful will find a way to dominate the system. And
Counselor, may I remind you, it's a republic if you can keep it.
if it's a republic, if you can keep it. Well, and it's touch and go now.
Oh, I know, but fortunately it is a republic. And I'd say that if we are the country that believes in God we trust, and if we are a country where a growing number of people are returning to faith, I pray and I hope that more noble minds will prevail ultimately. I've hoped that this is just a blip if we can avoid the craziness that can follow. We
Well,
need to have great people come forward who, first of all, who are educated. The things that I would say that I hold, look at people who have been our great leaders and our great presidents, is that they were well read. They were students of history. Jack Kennedy, in particular, they had perspective. We don't have perspective right now.
they were our ancestors, so there you're prophesying. I hope this works out. I think it's more than a blip. I think
No, I understate it when I call it a blip. No, this is a real threat of fracturing what we are.
Well, and it is part of the life cycle of government too.
But I'll remind you, we were there in the administration of Woodrow Wilson. We had A. Mitchell Palmer rounding up wobblies, significant repression, suppression of civil rights. Wilson himself was a rather cruel racist. So we've got precedents of this. We've had incompetent presidents before, but somehow we can get through this, I believe. The problem is, I think part of the problem is our education. That is, and I think I shared this before, there is a history according to Howard Zinn, I'm sure which you've read, and there's a history according to the historians that I read. And again, I think we need to advance our better selves in our education, the organizing myth that has sustained us. If we educate our children to believe that the country is going to be destroyed, it will be. We need something greater than that.
Well, there is something in the conservative or right-wing myth, which is that you can't repudiate your past. If you will die of moral suicide
Right.
if you find in your past nothing but slaveholders and cannibals and tyrants, and to not appreciate what America is, to not appreciate what the West is, really a God-blessed portion of planet Earth would be to die by moral suicide. And I've seen people I've seen a lot of black folks, particularly, rushing into different cults and new religions, looking for the truth because they found the old truths of their old churches haven't been satisfactory. And they lurch around and trying to find God, or gods and what's right and true. And when they come up with the most god awful answers, they flock after fools. I mean, you see this so often. I'm not talking about everybody, obviously, but a lot of people are. You see it in the piercings and the tats and the religious movements that people follow.
But time out for a moment. You and I are the product of I would say, a heavily integrated city, Detroit. And I feel, and I may be naive, but I've got, as you do, I'm sure, a number of African American friends. And I feel a kinship with, particularly with Christian African American friends that get me, that understand me, and I understand them.
Just saw today in the paper that my first, I think he
And,
was
and
like,
one other point I want to make, as much as you may condemn the country, and I realize we've confronted anti-Semitism, the country was a country of refuge for our grandparents. We
also,
wouldn't be here without this country. We would be charcoal someplace in Lithuania.
America is a miracle.
Right.
Goodness of America is, to my mind, palpable and overwhelming. I mean, and we're talking about who were your favorite presidents, who were the greatest, and not very few societies are capable of coming up with a Washington or a Lincoln. You don't just come up with.
I mean, can you imagine what a shitstorm would have been if Washington and Trump's personality would say, "Okay, I'll be king, piece of cake."
Yeah, well, I would hope that the people of the time wouldn't have picked him. I don't think they would have, but we're going out about one of my very first black friends from, well, kindergarten at least, was just quoted in the Epstein files in connection with this Ponzi scheme, ridiculous mess. And now he's a pastor. I know. He's a pastor. He lies about his age, but so you can trust him. There is a certain lawlessness in all of that. But black people and yellow people and red people, brown people and white people, we're all just people, and we're very much part of the same society. I told you about my friend who came over as a political asylee as a little girl and was interned, and she went through born in Baghdad, she went through Istanbul, hated Turkey, through Greece, loved Athens, got to Mexico, they lied their way into the country, they were interned in California, and she finally ended up in a suburb of Detroit where the Chaldeans, these Iraqi Christian people come, and she gave up religion, she repudiated religion, became an enemy of Catholicism. We've talked about it before. America is so powerful that she took on guilt for the Korematsu decision and the internment of immigrant Japanese during World War II, but that was our mistake. She took that guilt on herself. She wasn't even born. Her folks weren't even born then.
Time out, time out. Just as a psychiatrist, it does with guilt a lot of my life. My axiom has always been, and I'll speak to your Chaldean friend, I'm appreciative of her willingness to assume the guilt associated with the essentially incarceration of the Japanese. Because what is the function of guilt? It's to inform future behavior. And if that becomes a guideline, great. We should feel guilty for that. Like we weren't even here, but I feel some guilt about slavery. I feel some guilt about the way we treated Native Americans, and that should inform our future. That's a cautionary sign. That's what human beings that are sensitive and people of faith, they get that, right?
Yes, to me, wholesome civic guilt is just a terrific thing and a great corrective. Yeah, well said. I was proud of her, and I'm proud of the country that it would teach that she would internalize that. But that's the kind of country this is, where people do internalize. You call them myths, I would say the central verities of,
Same idea. Yeah, same idea, is that this is what our better selves aspire to.
and we've got good bones. We've got a good constitution. There's hope. We are dealing with, a well-recognized phenomenon. I'll tell you, it doesn't work out well in the Bible. What happens is that societies are crushed because of they go sour and they become unjust places, and God's wrath comes, and you get scourges. The Assyrians come and clean up the moral turpitude of the tribes of the 10 tribes. The Babylonians come and clean up the moral turpitude. They eliminate the society practically of the 2, of the other tribes, of the surviving tribes.
But let's harken back to our youth. Both you and I suspect, although we're a few years apart, we're probably quite vocal about issues such as, in my case, civil rights and the Vietnam War. And our generation was informed by that experience. So those of us that have emerged from the ashes of that conflict don't wish to revisit it. And the thing that enrages me right now is silly wars and continuing repression. And I think that's what, although some allege, perhaps with some foundation, that there's dark money supporting people in the streets, there's also genuine participation. I know friends that are now, this past weekend, spent time demonstrating here in Reno, Nevada, and they're not receiving dark money. They're people of
No,
conscience.
no, I don't know what kind of money they're talking about. The money doesn't go to the left-wing causes very often. The money goes to, the domination of society by the rich and the powerful. There's plenty of money floating around, just sloshing around.
So, what lessons? I realize that you're despairing
I'm not
from your
despairing, I have a lot of hope, but
okay.
the threat and what we see in history again and again, and what Plato thought. Plato would despair. He would think that the republic was doomed. I don't. I think we've got such strong bones and such innate strength that we can pull out of this, I hope, with God's will, with God's help. But it's going to be tough. But the tendency is for plutocracy to prevail and turn into tyranny. And I think we're right at the cusp of that. Um, the truth has to prevail. Um, and the money is not behind the truth. The money is behind the forces of plutocratic domination.
Let me introduce a concept that has been damned as politically incorrect recently. What is true patriotism? I love this country, and I think part of patriotism is to protest unjust acts when you see them. You love the country and you love what it can become. You ally as best you can with the angels.
Yes. Well, that's the point of America. It's I heard it talked about in I never liked the sermons that I heard in shul and synagogue growing up, but I remember it was striking. The one, um, rabbi that I thought was just a master of platitudes was going on about this country that means freedom, and it does. America is unique, and we grieve when we see America doing awful things. Watching ICE in the shadow of the American flag tormenting people, murdering people in their Walmart camo and their Keds and their work boots from, this is something else, and this does not befit America. We can do better. We should do better. God willing, we will do better. But I I mean, at the same time, my image growing up of adulthood was you come home from some horrible job and you have an uncomfortable suit on all day, and then you'd take off your jacket, and you'd be there in your tie and in your easy chair, and you'd read a newspaper. And there you'd be in your newspaper for your before dinner or after dinner, your precious few hours of time off, and every house would have somebody in it reading a newspaper. Hardly anybody reads newspapers now, and it within the last, 30 years, we've flipped. We've stopped being a newspaper reading society, and I don't know how well we're gonna do. We're getting stuff online, but I mean, that's one change, and that's part of where we're at now, along with the triumph of incredible inequality. I mean, the rich are much, much richer now in the relation to everyone else than they were at the height of the Gilded Age in the 1880s, 90s, at the turn of the last century before the income tax. This is scary for society, and these are not church-going people mostly who are these new masters, these dominating figures in our society who have more money than if I give $100 to a political party, that's a lot for me. If they give $100,000 to a political party, that's just chump change to them. That's not an equal society, and we've got, and we've got all these extremists, and including these extremists on the Supreme Court. They seem to believe that, others are the children of lesser gods. They don't seem to be restrained by the fear of God. That's really scary.
So when you pray and you pray for our country, what do you pray for?
Bless this city, bless this country, help us get on your side, help us stay on your side.
May our leaders have the wisdom and the compassion to lead
Well,
us through this.
we get the leaders we deserve. I mean, that's the problem here.
Well, I think we deserve better, and I think we need to pray for our own awareness when we make these kinds of decisions.
I don't know, Tommy. I
No,
think
no,
we
I
get
agree. Your doubt is well-founded, but I mean, if we have any hope, that's the Hail Mary, if you will. Forgive the Catholic metaphor.
they polled the German people 1946, a year after Germany was crushed, and they asked them about their politics, and 40% of the German people, 1946, were still Nazis. If Hitler had been alive, they would have voted for Hitler again. People, there was a reason they had to be destroyed, that their society had to be crushed as it was. People do tend to get the government that they deserve. No country that would vote for Trump for president is a wholesome country. We've got our problems. There's just no getting around it. Is it the lack of newspapers? Is it I don't know what it is, but and it's not just Trump, it's his whole cabinet. A bunch of sycophants and ignoramuses and bullies of I think the only man in the cabinet with brains is Stephen Miller, and is something of an evil genius. He's a Roy Cohn with infinitely more power than Roy Cohn had ever had. The definition of hell is a place where Hel, G-L, Loki's daughter, Loki, the trickster god,
Mhm.
it's her realm. It's a realm where there is no god, but but everything goes according to the will, whim, and caprice of Hel, Loki's daughter. So this is kind of hellish.
Well, let us hope we make better choices. Pray
God,
that we may.
please,
Right. We may. Well,
please.
I am deeply concerned about the next several weeks because one of the problems with being bullies is that if you're perceived as a bully, that somehow justifies horrendous retaliation. So I think Western
Divine
system.
divine retaliation. Yeah, that's the scary part.
Well, I'm very much afraid that as we approach the Super Bowl and as we approach the Olympics, that there's going to be some horrible mischief.
Well, Trump told the people who are dissatisfied with the Iranian regime in Iran that, "We have your backs. I
But
have your backs," he said,
he betrayed them. He didn't show up.
and he betrayed them. We took no action, and the mullahs came out, and they killed 30,000 people. They blinded more. We have your backs, and I do expect that we will have an explosion. We have enormous, military power in the region. Probably the next time I expect that talking to Iranians, they all expect us to explode, and they're hoping it explodes because they really, really want the mullahs gone. I don't know what's gonna happen. I can't see it happening. You can't put boots on the ground to, decapitate the regime, all their enablers right below them.
When we close, I'd like to point out a contrast between leadership styles for a moment. When you were just a boy, Jack Kennedy naively, following the counsel of Allen Dulles, invaded Cuba, and it was a horrible disaster. But what Kennedy did is he came forward to the country and he said, "This is my error, and we will rectify it." One. Point two is we're confronted with the Cuban Missile Crisis. How do you think we would have survived that had Donald Trump been our president?
Yeah, or Nikita Khrushchev, on the other hand, and is the head of Russia and not, Vladimir Putin.
Right. I mean, it would have been
Talking
over.
talking about oligarchs, talking
Yeah,
about plutocrats.
it would have been over. We would be still inhaling the radiation from that experience.
Well, cockroaches have to live too, you know?
Can we end this on a more positive note than that, Rabbi? May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Amen.
May he cause his light to shine upon
And
you,
countenance to shine on you and keep
and
you.
may
Yeah.
he grant you peace,
Amen.
his most precious gift. Okay. Until next time, brother. Love
Okay.
you. Be
Take care.
well.
Bye-bye.